The dust devil danced a prelude to damnation, a swirling phantom on the sun-baked plain, the only movement save for the lone rider. Caleb was a silhouette carved from granite and old grief, his horse a creature of shadow and bone. He reined in before the optimistic, creaking wagons of the settlers, a small, hopeful island in an ocean of unforgiving land. His voice, when it came, was like stones grinding together, low and freighted with a certainty that chilled the marrow despite the prairie heat. "You're heading into Modoc country," he stated, not asked. "Their patience is worn thinner than a summer-starved wolf. Turn back. Or at least, veer west, give their sacred lands wide berth." An older man, a self-appointed leader named Josiah, with a face like a weathered apple and eyes too bright with zealous conviction, scoffed. "We walk with the Lord, friend. He guides our path. These savages you speak of won't trouble souls under his protection." Several others murmured agreement, their faces set in a stubborn righteousness that brooked no argument from a man like Caleb, whose aura was more of brimstone than beatitude. Eliza, standing beside a wagon wheel, her calico dress dusted with the trail, felt a cold dread snake around her heart. Her gaze met Caleb's, a fleeting connection of shared understanding in the sea of defiant ignorance. She saw the truth in the harsh lines of his face, the bleak landscape reflected in his eyes. She opened her mouth, a quiet plea to reconsider, but Josiah's booming voice cut her off. "We thank you for your concern, stranger. But we'll not be deterred." Caleb's jaw tightened. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over them, lingering for a breath on Eliza's troubled face before he nodded once, a gesture of grim finality. He wheeled his horse, the animal moving with a fluid power that mirrored its rider's contained intensity, and rode away, not looking back, a prophet whose words had turned to ash on the wind. Eliza watched him go, a knot of foreboding tightening in her chest. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of slaughter, as the wagons creaked onward, deeper into the maw of the land the Modoc called home. That night, the wind itself seemed to hold its breath before the storm broke. Not a storm of rain, but of fire and fury. The air, moments before filled with the scent of wood smoke and coffee, was split by war cries that echoed the eagle's scream. Shadows detached themselves from the deeper darkness, swift and lethal. Chaos erupted. Orange light clawed at the sky as canvas caught fire, illuminating scenes of brutal, desperate struggle. Eliza, her father's old hunting rifle clutched in her hands, fired into the swirling melee, her movements born of a desperate courage she hadn't known she possessed. But courage was a fragile shield against such ferocity. A searing pain tore through her shoulder, and the world tilted, darkness rushing in to claim her. She fell amongst the carnage, the scent of blood and burning wood her last sensation, the last sound the receding thunder of hooves and the crackle of victorious flames consuming what was left of foolish dreams. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended, broken only by the whispering fire. Then, a new sound, the soft thud of hooves. Caleb had seen the glow from miles away, a malevolent star fallen to earth. He moved through the wreckage like a wraith, his face unreadable. He found her half hidden beneath an overturned provision box, her pale face streaked with soot and blood, breath shallow, a broken doll amidst the ruin. His hand, calloused and stained, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. For an instant, something flickered in the depths of his eyes, a memory, a pain, a resolve. He lifted her with an almost reverent care, her slight weight settling against him, and turned his back on the smoldering testament to unheeded warnings. The journey to Caleb's refuge was a passage through a fever dream for Eliza. She drifted in a haze of pain and fractured awareness, conscious only of the rhythmic sway of his horse, the solid strength of the arm that held her secure, and the vast, indifferent wilderness stretching around them. Mountains loomed like ancient, brooding gods, their peaks scraping a sky the color of faded denim. The air thinned, grew cooler, scented with pine and damp earth. When he finally stopped, it was before a cabin so weathered and unassuming it seemed an organic outgrowth of the rocky, tree-studded slope it nestled against. Smoke, thin as a prayer, curled from its stone chimney. Inside, the single room was Spartan, the air still and cool. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth, and a narrow cot were its sole furnishings. He laid her gently on the cot, the straw-filled mattress rustling softly. His touch, as he began to tend her wound, was surprisingly deft for hands more accustomed to reins and rifle. He cleaned the gash on her shoulder with boiled water, his expression focused, remote. He moved with an economy of motion, his silence as profound as the wilderness outside. Days bled into one another. Eliza watched him through slitted eyes, a silent observer of his solitary routine. He hunted, chopped wood, mended tack, his movements lean and purposeful. He would leave food for her, or a bowl of broth, a piece of roasted rabbit, on a small crate beside the cot, never speaking, his gaze rarely meeting hers directly, yet she felt its weight, its constant, quiet surveillance. She saw the shadows that lived behind his eyes when he thought her asleep, a darkness that spoke of a deep, unhealed wound within him. The cabin was a crucible of silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind through the pines, the distant call of a hawk. In this enforced stillness, a fragile awareness began to grow between them, unspoken, unacknowledged. He would ensure the fire never died during the chill nights. She would find an extra blanket, worn but clean, laid over her when the mountain air bit deep. One morning, she awoke to find a small, crudely carved wooden bird on the crate beside her water cup. Its lines were simple, yet it possessed a delicate grace. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. It was an offering, an acknowledgement, a bridge across the chasm of their silence. She looked towards Caleb, who was mending a leather strap by the low fire, his back to her. He didn't turn, but she sensed a subtle shift in his stillness, as if he knew she held his small gift. The isolation, initially a source of fear, slowly transformed into a strange kind of sanctuary. Here, away from the judgment and folly of the world she had known, a different set underscore of rules applied, dictated by survival, by the unspoken language of care. Trust, delicate as a moth's wing, began to unfurl in the quiet space they shared, nurtured by acts of kindness that asked for nothing in return. She was a survivor, he a protector, and in the heart of the desolate mountains, they were simply two souls tethered by circumstance, breathing the same rarefied air of a world pared down to its essentials. As Eliza's strength returned, so did a measure of her spirit. The fever receded, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She began to take small steps, testing her legs, her resolve. The cabin, once a symbol of her confinement, became a small world she could navigate. She would sit by the fire when Caleb was out, mending the tear in her dress with a needle and thread she found in a small tin box, her fingers moving with a slow, deliberate care. It was an act of reclaiming normalcy, a quiet defiance against the chaos that had shattered her life. Caleb would return, his eyes noting the small changes, the tidied hearth, the way she now sat upright, her gaze meeting his with a newfound steadiness. He offered no words, but a curt nod, a slight easing of the tension in his shoulders, spoke volumes. The silence between them remained, yet it was no longer empty. It was filled with a growing awareness, a current of unspoken understanding that flowed like an underground river. One evening, as he handed her a tin cup of herb tea, their fingers brushed. A jolt, subtle but undeniable, passed between them. Their eyes met, held for a moment longer than usual, a flicker of something raw and intensely human in their depths before he looked away, his composure restored, yet the air in the small cabin seemed to hum with the unsaid. She noticed the details of him more keenly now, the way the firelight caught the silver threads at his temples, the faint, jagged scar that traced a white line from his left temple into his hairline, usually hidden by his dark hair. It was a testament to some past violence, a story etched into his skin. He, in turn, observed the resilient set of her jaw, the way her eyes, the color of moss agate, held a quiet intelligence, a sorrow that hadn't extinguished her inner light. He saw the faint tremor in her hands as she accepted the cup, a reminder of her ordeal, and a fierce, protective instinct surged within him, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He began to leave small tokens of the outside world for her, a sprig of wild columbine tucked into a crack in the cabin wall, a perfectly shaped river stone, smooth and cool to the touch. These were not gifts demanding gratitude, but simple offerings, fragments of beauty in a harsh land. She would acknowledge them with a soft smile that rarely reached her lips but illuminated her eyes, a silent conversation that deepened their bond more profoundly than any words could. One afternoon, while he was checking his snares, she found a small, worn leather-bound book tucked beneath his cot. Its pages were filled with pressed wildflowers and sketches of birds, rendered with a surprising delicacy. It was a glimpse into a hidden part of him, a sensitivity buried deep beneath the stoic exterior. She closed it reverently, a new layer of understanding settling within her. This silent, watchful man was a tapestry of contradictions, his hardness a shield, not the entirety of his being. The rhythm of their days settled into a quiet pattern, shared meals eaten in the glow of the fire, the comfortable quiet of long evenings, the unspoken reliance on each other for company in the vast, echoing solitude. The world outside, with its dangers and its judgments, felt a universe away. A tempest gathered in the peaks, mirroring the storm that had long brewed in Caleb's soul. The wind, a mournful banshee, clawed at the cabin, rattling the single window pane, its voice a symphony of desolation. Inside, the fire spat and hissed, casting dancing, distorted shadows that writhed upon the rough-hewn walls. Eliza, huddled in her blanket, watched Caleb as he stared into the flames, his face a mask of stone, yet his eyes reflected the turmoil of the inferno within and without. The oppressive atmosphere, the shared confinement, emboldened her. "Your scar," she said, her voice soft but clear above the wind's howl. "How did you come by it?" He flinched, almost imperceptibly, his gaze snapping from the fire to her. For a long moment, he said nothing, the silence stretching taut, freighted with unspoken histories. The wind shrieked, a tormented cry. Then, the words came, dragged from a place of profound pain, sparse and heavy as the stones in a riverbed. "Sand Creek," he said, the name a raw wound. "I was younger then. Full of piss and patriotism. Rode with Chivington." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet each word was a hammer blow. "We weren't soldiers that day. We were butchers." He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on some distant, horrific memory replaying itself in the flames. A Cheyenne woman, she tried to protect her child. "I saw the trooper?" I hesitated, his hand clenched, the knuckles white. "The scar, it's a reminder. Of what I didn't do. Of what I became." The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. It explained everything, his haunted eyes, his solitary existence, his desperate warning to the settlers, his understanding of the Modoc's righteous fury. He was a man living in the shadow of his own damnation, seeking an atonement that always seemed just beyond his grasp. Eliza listened, her heart constricting with a wave of empathy so profound it almost stole her breath. This man, who had saved her, was himself deeply broken. When he finally fell silent, the only sound the keening wind, she reached out, her hand settling gently on his arm. His muscles were rigid beneath her touch. "You saved me, Caleb," she whispered. "That has to count for something." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a desolation that mirrored the storm outside, but also a flicker of surprise, of nascent hope. Encouraged by his vulnerability, or perhaps needing to unburden her own soul, Eliza spoke of her own past. "I was with those wagons because there was nowhere else for me," she admitted, her voice gaining strength. "I spoke out against a land grab in my town, defended a family accused unjustly. They called me a troublemaker, an agitator. My own kin turned their backs." She looked at her hands, clasped in her lap. "I thought, out west, a new start. Where a person's word, their integrity, might mean something." A bitter smile touched her lips. "I seem to have a talent for finding myself on the losing side of righteousness." Their shared confessions, fragments of broken lives offered in the storm-lashed intimacy of the cabin, stripped away the last vestiges of pretense. They were two outcasts, marked by the world's cruelty and their own pasts. The storm outside raged on, but within the small, firelit room, a different kind of intensity brewed, the fragile, terrifying, and fiercely powerful recognition of shared humanity, of understanding born from pain. The trust between them, no longer tentative, began to set like tempered steel. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving the air washed clean, the sky a bruised purple slowly yielding to pale gold. But the respite was short-lived. As Caleb scanned the tree line, his senses honed by years of solitude and survival, he caught a flicker of movement, then another. Not Modoc, their silhouette and way of moving were different. Settlers. Or what was left of them, their faces grim, their eyes burning with a mixture of fear and vengeful fury. Leading them was Josiah, his righteous certainty now twisted into a mask of bitter accusation. "There he is!" Josiah roared, pointing a trembling finger at Caleb. "The one who led us to slaughter. He knew. He conspired with them." The accusation, absurd and venomous, hung in the crisp morning air. Caleb's hand instinctively went to the Colt holstered at his hip. He'd expected this, or something like it. The world rarely let a man live down his past, or escape the consequences of others' folly. "Stay inside, Eliza," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. But Eliza, who had emerged from the cabin, her face pale but resolute, did not move. She had seen the raw injustice in Josiah's eyes too many times before. In her hand, she held Caleb's spare hunting rifle, its weight familiar, comforting. "They won't listen to reason, Caleb," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They need someone to blame." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise, then a deep, resonant understanding in his eyes. He saw not a frightened woman, but a warrior in her own right, her spirit unbent. He nodded, a grim acceptance. The settlers, emboldened by their numbers, advanced. A shot rang out, kicking up dirt near Caleb's feet. The confrontation was inevitable. Caleb moved with lethal grace, returning fire, using the terrain for cover. But this time, he wasn't alone. Eliza, positioned by the cabin doorframe, took careful aim, her shot finding the shoulder of a man about to draw a bead on Caleb. Her jaw was set, her movements economical, her quiet resilience forged into active defense. She was not merely surviving, she was fighting, for him, for the sanctuary they had found, for the fragile hope of a future. Together, they were a desperate, formidable force. The exchange was brief, brutal. The settlers, disorganized and driven more by blind rage than skill, were no match for Caleb's deadly precision and Eliza's steady nerve. Faced with a resistance they hadn't anticipated, their anger faltered, replaced by a dawning fear. Josiah, his face contorted, fired one last wild shot before turning to flee, his remaining followers scattering back into the trees like frightened quail. Silence descended again, broken only by their ragged breaths and the distant chirping of a bird, oblivious to the human drama. Caleb lowered his rifle, his gaze finding Eliza's. She stood tall, the rifle still warm in her hands, a smudge of gunpowder on her cheek. In that moment, something profound shifted between them. The rescuer and the rescued were gone, replaced by equals, partners forged in the crucible of shared danger. He walked towards her, his eyes holding an emotion she had never seen there before, a raw, unguarded tenderness. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently wiping the soot from her cheek. "You were right," he said, his voice husky. They didn't listen. A faint smile touched her lips. Some never do. The epilogue of their story was written not in words, but in the slow, deliberate rebuilding of lives. They fortified Caleb's cabin, expanded it, turned it from a hermit's refuge into a home. A small garden took root under Eliza's patient hand, coaxing green life from the mountain soil. The scars remained, his etched on his skin and soul, hers on her memory, but they no longer defined them. They were markers of battles fought, of survival, of the strength found in shared vulnerability. Fire, once a symbol of destruction and torment, now burned warmly in their hearth, a beacon of safety and companionship. They found their peace not in forgetting the past, but in building a future that honored its lessons, a quiet, resilient love blooming in the heart of the wild, a testament to the enduring power of redemption and the courage to begin anew, side by side, under the vast, watchful sky. This tale of survival, redemption, and the unexpected blossoming of love in the harshest of landscapes reminds us that even in the deepest silences, connections can form, and that true strength is often found not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to face it alongside another. If this story of Caleb and Eliza's hard-won peace resonated with you, and you long for more tales of dramatic Western romance where love is the ultimate frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the heart of the Old West, and let us know in the comments what you thought of their story. Your engagement helps us bring more of these sagas to life.